On the fringes of dusty Sparrow Creek, amidst lives etched in hardship and beneath rusty tin roofs, 11-year-old Lyra Meadowes harbored a dazzling secret. A voice as pure as morning dew, a rough diamond awaiting its polish. Raised in poverty, enduring the sting of ridicule for her patched-up uniform, Lyra quietly nurtured her passion, her hard-working mother's boundless love and sacrifice, her only solace and fuel. But could that unadorned voice, rising from a humble village school stage, possess the power to shatter cruel prejudices, stir the deepest chords of the heart, and unveil a radiant new chapter? Or would it remain mere whispered melodies within a crumbling home, lost to the indifferent tides of fate? Join Lyra on her extraordinary journey from shadow into light, where raw talent and a sincere heart compose a ballad that will stir the soul. The sun, a molten coin in the vast Mississippi sky, beat down on Sparrow Creek, a place more defined by what it lacked than what it possessed. Here, on the frayed edge of a town that progress had largely forgotten, rows of time-worn trailers huddled together, their corrugated tin roofs a patchwork of rust and faded paint, shimmering like bruised jewels under the relentless heat. Dust devils danced along the unpaved tracks, carrying with them the scent of parched earth and the faint, ever-present aroma of pine from the distant woods. In one such trailer, a faded sky-blue relic with a perpetually lopsided porch step, lived 11-year-old Lyra Meadowes. Every morning, long before the first rooster crowed its hesitant welcome to the dawn, Lyra's day began. At precisely 4:30 a.m., the gentle tremor of her mother's hand on her shoulder would rouse her from dreams often filled with soaring melodies she couldn't quite name. There were no video games waiting, no leisurely selection of trendy outfits like the girls at Creekwood Elementary indulged in. For Lyra, the pre-dawn hours were for duty, for love, for the quiet rhythm of survival. She would help her mother, Eleanor, prepare for their shift at the Sweet Surrender Bakery, a small, struggling establishment in the heart of Sparrow Creek. Eleanor was a woman sculpted by hardship, slender but with a sinewy strength in her arms and an unwavering light in her hazel eyes. Her face, etched with fine lines that spoke of sleepless nights and quiet worries, would soften into a tender smile whenever she looked at Lyra. "Kindness costs nothing, little bird," she'd often murmur, her voice a soothing balm, "and it's the richest thing we own." The bakery, with its perpetual comforting scent of yeast, cinnamon, and warm sugar, was both a sanctuary and a place of unceasing toil. Lyra, small for her age but nimble, would wipe down the worn formica countertops, arrange the day-old bread for discounted sale, and meticulously clean the ancient, hulking mixer, its groans a familiar soundtrack to her early mornings. Her own dreams, fragile as spun sugar, were often woven into the steam rising from the ovens, dreams of a world beyond the dusty confines of Sparrow Creek. School was a different kind of trial. Lyra didn't have many friends, if any. Her school uniform, a hand-me-down several sizes too big, was lovingly patched at the elbows and hem by Eleanor's patient hands. Her shoes, scuffed and worn thin at the soles, seemed to invite the whispers and pointed stares of her classmates. At Creekwood Elementary she was an easy target, a ghost haunting the periphery of their bright, boisterous world. She usually found refuge in the back row of Mrs. Davison's fifth-grade class, a silent, reserved figure. But her brown eyes, large and luminous, held a depth that belied her years, as if they cradled secret symphonies, melodies she only dared to hum when she was certain no one could hear. They were songs of longing, of hope, of the unspoken beauty she found in the wild flowers pushing through cracks in the pavement, or the way the moonlight painted the rusty trailers silver. One crisp Monday morning in early October, the air carrying the first hint of autumn's chill, Principal Thompson's voice crackling with static echoed through the school's antiquated PA system. "Good morning, Creekwood," he boomed. "This week, we're excited to announce our annual Talent Week. If any student wishes to showcase their unique abilities, please sign up on the list posted outside my office by Wednesday afternoon. Let your talents shine." A buzz of electric excitement rippled through Mrs. Davison's classroom. Michael Johnson declared he'd perform his latest TikTok dance routine, complete with flashing sneakers. Amelia Peterson, whose parents owned the only music store in town, announced she'd play a complex piano sonata. Young Timmy O'Connell, whose father was a local musician, boasted about his drum solo. Lyra remained silent, her gaze fixed on the chipped paint of her desk, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The thought of standing before them, of offering a piece of her hidden self, was terrifying. Yet a tiny persistent spark flickered within her, a yearning she couldn't quite extinguish. That evening, after the last of the bakery's dishes were washed and stacked, and the scent of bleach mingled with the lingering sweetness of day-old pastries, Lyra sat with Eleanor in their small, lamp-lit living area. Eleanor hummed a soft tune as she mended a tear in Lyra's uniform, an old folk song her own mother used to sing. It was a melody that had cradled Lyra through countless childhood fevers and quiet, hungry nights. Greensleeves, her mother had called it, a song for dreamers. The melody wrapped around Lyra, comforting and familiar. Suddenly, the spark within her flared. She reached for a stubby pencil and a scrap of paper torn from a grocery receipt. Her hand trembled as she carefully wrote her name. Later, tucked into her narrow bed, with a chorus of crickets serenading the Mississippi night, she whispered into the darkness, "I'll sing that song, Mama. The one you always sing when I'm not feeling well. Greensleeves." The next day at school, Lyra stood before the bulletin board outside Principal Thompson's office. Her palms were damp, her breath caught in her throat. The sign-up sheet was already a tapestry of confident, loopy signatures. She saw Michael's flamboyant scrawl, Amelia's neat cursive. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she uncapped her worn pen, and on the very last line, in small, hesitant letters, she wrote, "Lyra Meadowes, singing." She hadn't even taken 10 steps down the hallway when the first wave of giggles reached her ears. Lyra Meadowes? Singing? It was Jessica Albright, her voice dripping with amusement. "This has to be a joke. Maybe she'll yodel or something." Another voice, gruff and mocking, chimed in. "Yeah, or sing through one of those rusty tin cans from her neighborhood." Each word was a tiny, sharp stone, pelting her already fragile courage. Lyra didn't cry, not then. She simply lowered her head, her hair falling like a curtain around her face, and clutched the small, tattered notebook where she'd meticulously copied the lyrics to Greensleeves in her neat, slightly tilted handwriting. The melodies in her mind felt a little fainter that day. That evening, Eleanor found her in her tiny room, huddled on her bed, practicing. Her voice was a mere whisper at first, shaky and uncertain, but as she sang, it gained a fragile clarity, as pure and cool as spring water. "Alas, my love, you do me wrong, to cast me off discourteously." Eleanor stood in the doorway, her heart aching with a mixture of pride and trepidation. She said nothing, simply leaned against the doorframe, listening. When the song ended, a profound silence filled the small space. Then, Eleanor quietly entered and sat beside Lyra on the edge of the bed. "You know, little bird," she said softly, her hand gently stroking Lyra's hair, "I once dreamed of standing on a stage, too. A real stage, with bright lights and people listening. I wanted to be an actress." A wistful smile touched her lips. "But then Grandma got sick, really sick. I had to leave school, give up my scholarship, to take care of her and the younger ones. I never regretted it, not for a moment, Family comes first. She paused, her eyes meeting Lyra's. But if I could see you walk onto that stage, sharing your gift, that would be the most beautiful gift you could ever give me. It would be like a piece of my own dream coming true through you. Lyra looked up, her own eyes brimming with unshed tears. Will you come, Mama? Will you be there? Eleanor nodded, her smile unwavering, despite the weariness that often clung to her. Even if I have to crawl there after a double shift, wild horses couldn't keep me away. Rehearsal day arrived cloaked in a nervous drizzle. Lyra was the last contestant scheduled. Mrs. Peterson, Amelia's mother and the volunteer music coordinator for the event, looked at her notes with a hint of impatience. Lyra Meadowes? She called out, her voice echoing slightly in the mostly empty auditorium. Do you have a backing track, dear? A CD or a USB drive? Lyra clutched her notebook tighter. No, ma'am, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'll be singing a cappella. A collective sigh, almost imperceptible, rippled through the few teachers and parent volunteers present. A couple of older students, lingering from their own rehearsals, exchanged eye rolls. An a cappella folk song from her? This was going to be painful. But Lyra, remembering her mother's words, stood as tall as her small frame would allow. She closed her eyes, shutting out the skeptical faces, the cavernous auditorium, her own gnawing fear. She took a breath, then another, and began. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Wait, she'd practiced green sleeves. Her mind, in its panic, had defaulted to another ancient melody her mother often hummed, one just as poignant, just as deeply embedded in her soul. No matter. She let the melody flow. It was just her voice, unadorned, vulnerable. No microphone to amplify it, no instruments to cushion it, no spotlight to frame it. Just Lyra and the song. Within seconds, the restless shuffling in the auditorium ceased. Mrs. Peterson, who had been absently tapping her pen, looked up, her expression shifting from mild annoyance to startled attention. Another teacher, midway through pouring coffee from a thermos, froze, the dark liquid suspended in its arc. Lyra's voice wasn't powerful in the conventional sense. It didn't boom or soar with practiced technique. Instead, it was like a fine silver mist, seeping through the cracks of even the most guarded hearts. It carried the scent of wildflowers after rain, the hushed sorrow of twilight, the unwavering hope of a new dawn. It was raw, achingly pure, and utterly captivating. When the final haunting note of Scarborough Fair faded into the expectant silence, no one clapped, not immediately. It wasn't because they disliked it. It was because they had forgotten, for a precious few moments, what they were supposed to do after something so fragile, so unexpectedly profound, had unfolded before them. They had been transported. Mrs. Peterson was the first to break the spell, a slow, deliberate clap, then another, until a warm, if somewhat stunned, applause filled the space. On the walk home, the drizzle now a gentle mist, Lyra asked her mother, her voice small, Mama, if people laugh at me during the real show, should I stop singing? Eleanor smiled, her arm around Lyra's shoulders, pulling her close. No, sweetheart, you keep singing. You sing louder, because the world, more than ever, needs to hear the voices that have too often been silenced, the songs that have never been truly heard. You sing for all of them, and you sing for yourself. The morning of the talent show dawned bright and clear, the previous day's rain having washed the world clean. The courtyard of Creekwood Elementary was a riot of color. Hand-drawn banners and crepe paper streamers draped from every available surface. A makeshift stage, assembled from borrowed risers, stood in the auditorium, adorned with slightly deflated balloons and a string of twinkling fairy lights. An LED board, usually displaying lunch menus, flashed, Creekwood Elementary, let your light shine. Lyra arrived early with Eleanor. She wore a simple, pale yellow dress, the only one in her small wardrobe that was still relatively intact. Eleanor had spent hours the night before carefully ironing out every crease, her tired hands moving with gentle precision. Lyra's dark brown hair, usually a little untamed, was neatly plaited into two small braids that framed her earnest face. She looked tense, her small hands twisting the fabric of her dress, but her eyes held a quiet determination. In her lap, she clutched the faded notebook, its pages filled with the lyrics she now knew by heart. Eleanor stood beside her, holding her hand. Despite working the graveyard shift at the bakery, ensuring the morning bread was ready for Sparrow Creek, she had made every effort to be there. Her face was pale with fatigue, dark circles smudged beneath her eyes. But those eyes shone with an immense, fierce pride as she gazed at her daughter. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Students performed one by one. Michael Johnson's TikTok dance was met with whoops and cheers from his friends, his light-up sneakers a blur of motion. Amelia Peterson played her piano piece flawlessly, her fingers flying across the keys, earning polite, appreciative applause. Timmy O'Connell's drum solo was energetic, if a little chaotic. Each act was a burst of youthful exuberance. Lyra sat in the designated waiting area, a quiet island in a sea of chattering excitement. No one spoke to her directly, though she felt the familiar weight of sideways glances, heard the soft, stifled giggles. "Just wait," a voice whispered nearby. "The sob story act is coming up." Another added, "I heard she's singing without any music. A cappella. How boring is that going to be?" Finally, her name was called. The MC, a young enthusiastic teacher named Mr. Henderson, announced her performance with a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation in his voice. And now, for something a little different, a solo vocal performance, without any musical accompaniment. She will be singing the traditional folk song, Scarborough Fair. Please give a warm Creekwood welcome to Lyra Meadowes. A smattering of hesitant claps rippled through the audience. A few students in the front rows pulled out their phones, ready to record what they anticipated would be a cringe-worthy spectacle. One boy, notorious for his pranks, had a comical sticker ready to superimpose on any video he might upload to the school's unofficial social media page. Lyra walked onto the stage, her legs feeling like lead. The stage lights were surprisingly bright, blurring the faces in the crowd into an indistinct sea. She couldn't clearly see individual expressions, couldn't pick out the mockers from the indifferent. But she knew her mother was out there, somewhere in the third row, near the window, just as she'd promised. And that knowledge, that singular, unwavering point of love and belief, was enough to make her stand a little taller, to take a deep, steadying breath. "Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme." Her voice, at first a mere thread of sound, rose into the expectant hush. It was gentle, like a breeze whispering through tall grass, soft and unpretentious, yet imbued with a sincerity that was almost heartbreaking. Initially, there were whispers, a few impatient glances exchanged. But gradually, an extraordinary stillness settled over the entire auditorium. It wasn't the silence of boredom or disinterest, but the profound quiet that comes when an audience is utterly captivated, drawn in by something unexpected and deeply moving. Mrs. Peterson, who had been dutifully jotting notes for each performer, slowly set her pen down, her gaze fixed on the small figure on stage. An elderly gentleman in the front row, a grandparent perhaps, with silver hair and distinguished gold-rimmed glasses, slowly removed them and was seen dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. Every word Lyra sang seemed to carry a weight of untold stories, of quiet resilience, of dreams nurtured in unlikely places, of a wisdom far beyond her 11 years. There was no fancy technique, no flashy choreography, just a child pouring her entire heart and soul into a simple, ancient melody. When the final poignant note faded, the silence in the room stretched, thick and resonant. 1 second, 2, 3. Then, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was Principal Thompson. Then another, and another, until a wave of applause erupted. It wasn't the raucous cheering that had greeted the flashier acts, but something deeper, more reverent, as if the audience was collectively acknowledging something pure and beautiful that had just passed through them. Then, one person stood up, the elderly gentleman with the gold-rimmed glasses. A moment later, a teacher in the middle rows rose. And then, as if by a shared, unspoken accord, the entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding, a standing ovation for the little girl from Sparrow Creek. Lyra stood still, her hands gripping the hem of her yellow dress, her eyes shimmering, but no tears falling. The spotlight, no longer a blinding glare, but a warm embrace, shone on her face. In that moment, she was no longer the poor, teased girl from the trailer park. She was an artist, a storyteller, a young soul who had found her voice and shared it bravely. Down below, in the third row by the window, Lyra Meadowes slowly rose to her feet, one hand pressed tightly over her heart. Her eyes red-rimmed, but her lips curved into the most radiant smile Lyra had ever seen. After the applause finally subsided and Lyra stepped down from the stage, her legs still trembling, but her spirit soaring, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile approached her. She wore a smart navy blouse and a name badge that read, Evelyn Reed, Director, Havenwood City Youth Choir. "You must be Lyra," Ms. Reed said, her voice warm and melodious. "I was here today because my nephew performed earlier. But it was your performance, dear, that truly compelled me to speak to you. That was extraordinary." She paused, her gaze thoughtful. "Would you, perhaps, be interested in visiting our studio in Havenwood for a more formal voice assessment? We have a special scholarship program for promising young talents." Lyra didn't know how to respond. Her mind was a whirl of emotion. She looked towards her mother, who had made her way through the dispersing crowd. Eleanor nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of pride and joy. "Go on, little bird," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is it. This is the voice the world has been waiting to hear." The following Saturday morning, Lyra Meadowes, accompanied by a beaming Eleanor, stepped into a professional recording studio for the very first time. It was located in downtown Havenwood, a bustling city that felt a world away from the quiet dustiness of Sparrow Creek. The studio, Soundscape Harmonics, was a realm of hushed reverence, where every wall was lined with charcoal gray acoustic foam panels, and soft recessed ceiling lights cast a glow that felt both alien and magical. Outside, the cacophony of city traffic buzzed on, a relentless urban symphony. But inside this room, everything felt suspended, held in a bubble of creative potential. Ms. Evelyn Reed, the conductor who had extended the invitation, had graciously picked them up from the bus station in her own car. She was a woman, perhaps in her late 50s, her silver-streaked hair swept back elegantly. Her voice was invariably gentle, but her eyes, a keen, intelligent blue, missed nothing. "Just think of today as a little adventure, Lyra," Ms. Reed had said during the drive, sensing the girl's nervous awe. "No pressure at all. I simply want to hear you sing again, just like you did at your school." Lyra nodded, clutching her worn notebook of lyrics as if it were a precious talisman. She wore her best pair of jeans, carefully patched by Eleanor, and a clean, faded blue blouse. No makeup, no elaborate hairstyling, just her authentic self, simple and honest. Eleanor sat quietly in the observation area, her hands clasped in her lap. her expression a mixture of hope and maternal anxiety. Marcus, the studio engineer, a man with a salt-and-pepper stubble and the quietly weary demeanor of someone who had heard thousands of voices, good, bad, and indifferent, sat behind a vast mixing console that looked like the cockpit of a spaceship. When Ms. Reed ushered Lyra into the recording booth, Marcus raised a skeptical eyebrow, his voice crackling through the intercom. "This is the one, Evelyn?" "She looks young." "Yes, Marcus, this is her," Ms. Reed replied calmly, her voice smooth through the headphones. "Trust me on this. Just let her sing." Lyra stepped up to the large, intimidating microphone. It was positioned too high for her. Marcus, with a sigh that was more habit than annoyance, adjusted it downwards. Ms. Reed entered the booth and placed a reassuring hand on Lyra's shoulder. "You can sing Scarborough Fair again, dear, or any other song you feel comfortable with. Whatever comes from your heart." Lyra looked through the thick soundproof glass at her mother. Eleanor offered a small, encouraging smile, a silent message of unwavering belief. Lyra turned back to Ms. Reed. "I'll sing that one again, ma'am. My mother's song." No background music, just the profound, expectant silence of the soundproof room. And then, the voice of an 11-year-old girl, rising like a prayer. "Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme?" In the control room, Marcus, who had been idly fiddling with a knob, sat bolt upright. Ms. Reed folded her arms, a soft, almost tender expression gracing her features. Lyra closed her eyes, and each lyric flowed out, not as a practiced performance, but as a stream of pure, unadulterated emotion. A warm breeze weaving its way through a room accustomed to the often sterile perfection of studio recordings. Her voice carried the echoes of hardship, the resilience of love, the quiet dignity of a spirit unbowed. When the song concluded, a hush fell over the control room. Marcus leaned towards his microphone. His earlier skepticism completely vanished. "You haven't had any formal vocal training, have you, kid?" "No, sir," Lyra replied, her voice small. "Yet you know how to phrase, how to stay on pitch, how to control your breath, and most importantly, how to convey genuine emotion without forcing it. It's uncanny." He shook his head, a look of mingled surprise and admiration on his face. "Your voice, it isn't loud. It isn't technically perfect by conservatory standards, but damn, kid, it's real. It's got soul." Ms. Reed stepped back into the booth, her eyes shining. She gently took Lyra's hand. "Do you know, Lyra, that Scarborough Fair is an ancient folk ballad, passed down through generations for hundreds of years?" "My mama sings it a lot," Lyra replied softly. "She says it's a song for dreamers, for people who hold on to hope even when things are hard." Ms. Reed smiled. "Perhaps that's why your voice reaches people the way it does, Lyra. It carries the truth of those dreamers." That very afternoon, Ms. Reed, with a sense of quiet urgency, sent the raw recording of Lyra's audition to the admissions board of the prestigious Etheria Conservatory in Viridian City, where she served as an advisory member on the scholarship committee. It was for a highly competitive partial scholarship program specifically designed for gifted young musicians from underserved rural areas. Only 2 students were selected each year from a vast pool of applicants. "You don't have to try to beat anyone, Lyra," Ms. Reed had told her before they parted ways at the bus station. "You just have to be yourself. Your voice is your truth." 3 agonizingly long weeks later, a pale, cream-colored envelope bearing the elegant, embossed logo of the Etheria Conservatory arrived at their small trailer in Sparrow Creek. The mailman, Mr. Henderson's older brother, handed it to Eleanor with a curious glance. Eleanor's hands trembled so violently she could barely slit it open with a butter knife. Lyra stood beside her, holding her breath. Dear Ms. Lyra Meadowes, Eleanor read aloud, her voice choked with emotion, we were profoundly moved and deeply impressed by the recording submitted by Ms. Evelyn Reed. After careful review and with the unanimous approval of the selection committee, we are honored and delighted to invite you to join Etheria Conservatory's Distinguished Summer Arts Program this June in Viridian City. All tuition, travel, and lodging expenses will be fully covered by a special benefactor's grant. Eleanor couldn't continue. Tears streamed freely down her face, tears of disbelief, of overwhelming joy, of a mother's boundless pride. Lyra simply stared at the letter, the elegant script blurring before her eyes. Then a whisper, barely audible, escaped her lips. "Mama, I got in." For the first time in her young life, Lyra Meadowes felt as if she was no longer sitting in the shadowed back row, but stepping into a light all her own. June in Viridian City blazed with a vibrant, humid intensity. The sun stretched like a bolt of golden silk over wide boulevards shaded by ancient, sprawling oak trees. The Etheria Conservatory, a hallowed institution, stood with quiet dignity atop a gentle hill, its historic red-brick buildings adorned with intricate stonework and tall, arched windows of hand-painted frosted glass that shimmered in the summer light. For many of the students enrolled in the summer arts program, it was simply another prestigious, resume-building summer camp. But for Lyra Meadowes, it felt like stepping into an entirely different universe, a world both overwhelmingly grand and as delicately beautiful as a fragile dream. On the first day, Lyra pulled her mother's old, battered suitcase, its wheels squeaking a mournful protest, into the bustling dormitory. She walked slowly, almost timidly, amongst a kaleidoscope of chattering, confident classmates. They wore brightly colored floral dresses, designer sneakers, and carried embroidered backpacks slung casually over their shoulders. They hailed from cities Lyra had only read about in books: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Some had been tutored by private vocal coaches since they were old enough to speak. Others had already performed in regional theaters or sung with internationally recognized youth choirs. And then there was Lyra, from a trailer park in Sparrow Creek, Mississippi, who had never formally studied music theory, whose only stage had been a makeshift platform in her elementary school auditorium, and who still kept her worn notebook of handwritten lyrics tucked safely within her suitcase like a sacred text. The opening orientation took place in a magnificent domed hall, its ceiling painted with frescoes of cherubic figures playing celestial instruments. Ms. Evelyn Reed, looking serene and distinguished, stood at the polished oak podium. Her voice, though soft, resonated with a quiet authority that filled the grand space. "Welcome, young artists, to Etheria," she began. "Here, we do not seek mere technical perfection, for perfection without heart is an empty vessel. We seek souls that yearn to tell stories through music. We seek voices that carry truth. Remember, sometimes the simplest, most honest voice is the one that lingers the longest in the hearts of those who listen." But Lyra soon discovered that Ms. Reed's inspiring words didn't entirely shield her from the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, realities of life within Etheria's hallowed halls. The first workshop was on vocal anatomy. The instructor, a stern woman with an impeccable bun, distributed full-color diagrams of the larynx, explaining the diaphragm, vocal folds, and resonance placement with brisk efficiency. Lyra was utterly bewildered. She had never encountered such terms. She just sang. "Do you know if you're a soprano or a mezzo, dear?" A girl with a cascade of blonde curls and an air of bored sophistication asked her during a break. Her name was Victoria. Lyra flushed. I'm not sure, ma'am. I mean, miss." Victoria raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "You've never had formal vocal training, have you?" Lyra managed a small, uneasy smile. Number I just sing with my mom. That simple, honest answer drew a few condescending glances, looks that made her feel like a roughly hewn, handmade craft inadvertently displayed in a showroom filled with high-tech, polished chrome. Victoria, who hailed from a prestigious arts academy in Boston, leaned over to her equally polished neighbor and whispered, just loud enough for Lyra to hear, "Looks like the scholarship committee made a diversity pick this year. How quaint." The days that followed were a relentless barrage of challenges. In harmony class, Lyra struggled to read sheet music quickly enough, the notes blurring into an indecipherable code. In vocal technique sessions, she often lagged behind, her untutored instincts sometimes at odds with the precise instructions. Once, during a sight-singing exercise, she froze completely, the lyrics vanishing from her mind under the weight of sheer nervousness. Old, painful memories of being mocked at Creekwood Elementary came flooding back, reopening wounds she thought had begun to heal. She felt small, insignificant, a tiny sparrow lost in a flock of brilliant, exotic birds. One humid evening, Lyra sat alone on the stone porch of the dormitory, staring out at the dimly lit courtyard, the scent of night-blooming jasmine heavy in the air. Tears pricked at her eyes. She missed her mother, missed the familiar comfort of their tiny trailer, missed the simple, unconditional acceptance she found in Eleanor's loving gaze. A shadow fell beside her. It was Ms. Reed, holding 2 steaming mugs. She offered one to Lyra. "Mint tea," she said softly, taking a seat. "My grandmother's remedy for a troubled heart." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of city traffic. "I don't think I belong here, Ms. Reed," Lyra finally whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "And why do you feel that way, Lyra?" "I'm not like them," she gestured vaguely towards the dormitory. "I don't know anything about proper technique, or music history, or anything, really. I come from a place nobody here has ever even heard of. I feel like an imposter." Ms. Reed looked at her, her gaze gentle but unwavering. "Lyra," she said, "I was once a country girl, too, from a tiny town in the Appalachian foothills. When I first arrived at conservatory, all I had was a battered old guitar my grandfather had taught me to play, and a voice that was more passion than polish. At first, people laughed at my accent, at my simple, homemade dresses, at how little I knew about music theory. I wanted to run home every single day." She paused, a reminiscent smile playing on her lips. "But then, one wise old professor, a man who had seen and heard it all, took me aside. He said, 'Evelyn, my dear, technique can be learned. Theory can be mastered. But emotion, genuine, heartfelt emotion, that cannot be taught. It must be lived. You bring something to your music that many of these technically proficient students have forgotten or perhaps never knew. A reason to sing." Lyra was quiet, absorbing Ms. Reed's words. She had never considered her background, her untutored rawness, as a potential strength. She had only ever seen it as a deficiency. A few days later, the class was assigned to prepare a solo piece for the final showcase performance of the summer program. Victoria, naturally, chose a complex and fiendishly difficult Italian aria full of trills and coloratura passages. Another student, a boy with a booming baritone, selected a dramatic number from a hit Broadway musical. And Lyra? After much soul-searching and remembering Ms. Reed's words, she chose a song that was simple, honest, and deeply personal. "You Are My Sunshine." It was the song Eleanor used to sing to her when they walked home together in the pouring rain after a long day at the bakery, their arms wrapped around a cheap cardboard box filled with unsold, leftover pastries, their only shield against the storm, a shared, tattered umbrella. When it was Lyra's turn to present her chosen piece during a rehearsal workshop, many of her classmates looked surprised, some even openly skeptical. "You are my sunshine?" It was practically a nursery rhyme. There was no backing track, no spotlight, just Lyra standing center stage in the rehearsal hall, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. And then, that voice, rising again, as light as a breath, as soft as a cherished memory, echoing with an almost unbearable tenderness into the ensuing silence. "The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping, I dreamed I held you in my arms." Victoria, seated in the front row, stopped taking notes, her pen hovering forgotten above her pad. A notoriously critical music instructor, known for his exacting standards, let out a long, quiet sigh, his stern expression softening as if he were being pulled back to some distant, sun-drenched childhood memory. When Lyra sang the final, achingly sincere lines, "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away." No one in the room said a word, but everyone felt it. She hadn't just sung a song. She had shared a piece of her soul. She had reminded everyone in that room, from the most jaded instructor to the most ambitious student, why music had ever moved them in the first place. The final performance of the Etheria Conservatory Summer Arts Program took place in the Nightingale Auditorium, a historic wooden concert hall renowned for its warm acoustics, capable of seating over 500 people. That evening, a gentle summer rain fell over Viridian City, a soft patter against the tall arch windows of the conservatory. Umbrellas of every conceivable color bobbed like a field of exotic flowers along the pathways leading to the main gate. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with a palpable excitement. Parents in their Sunday best, distinguished musicians, local journalists, and even a few discreetly observant talent scouts filled the plush velvet seats. Lyra Meadowes stood backstage, the murmur of the expectant crowd a dull roar in her ears. She clutched a handwritten sheet containing the lyrics to her song, though she knew them by heart. The dress she wore was a gift, a simple, elegant gown of pale sky-blue fabric, lovingly stitched together by one of the conservatory's costume design teachers who had been touched by Lyra's quiet sincerity. The teacher had used fabric from 2 old, donated formal dresses, transforming them into something new and beautiful, much like Etheria was hoping to transform Lyra. Her dark hair was loosely tied back with a simple ribbon, and around her neck hung a small tarnished silver pendant shaped like a sun, the only piece of jewelry her mother had ever managed to buy for her. A gift for her 10th birthday, purchased with hoarded pennies and dimes. Eleanor Meadowes sat in the 4th row, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. She wore her best, carefully pressed dress, her hair still slightly damp from the rain. Her eyes, wide and luminous, were fixed on the empty stage. She had taken the overnight bus from Sparrow Creek, a grueling 12-hour journey, carrying a small, carefully wrapped box of her finest pastries, pecan pralines and lemon tarts, as a thank-you gift for Ms. Reed, and a hand-embroidered handkerchief bearing Lyra's initials, a keepsake she had stayed up all night to finish. When she had first entered the grandeur of the Nightingale Auditorium, she had frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the opulence, the glittering chandeliers, the sight of other parents in expensive suits and sparkling jewelry. But she hadn't wavered. "My daughter will stand on that stage tonight," she thought with fierce pride, "and I will be the first to rise for her." The program opened with a dazzling array of talent, complex classical piano solos that elicited gasps of admiration, powerful Broadway excerpts performed by students with voices trained to fill stadiums, intricate ensemble pieces showcasing remarkable technical proficiency. Each act received polite, measured, and sometimes enthusiastic applause. Then, the MC, a distinguished-looking professor with a warm smile, stepped to the microphone. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice resonating through the hall, we have a young artist whose journey to Etheria has been a remarkable one. From the small town of Sparrow Creek, Mississippi, please welcome Miss Lyra Meadowes, performing a song that I believe will touch all of your hearts. You Are My Sunshine. A small, almost imperceptible murmur passed through the room. Some whispered, their expectations perhaps lowered by the choice of such a seemingly simple, old-fashioned folk song after the preceding displays of virtuosity. Lyra stepped onto the stage, her legs trembling slightly despite her resolve. The stage lights were even brighter here, a blinding constellation that blurred everything beyond the first few rows. She couldn't see her mother, couldn't see Ms. Reed, couldn't discern the expressions on the sea of faces, whether expectant, curious, or doubtful. All she could hear was the frantic pounding of her own heartbeat and the distant, cherished memory of a rainy day in Sparrow Creek. Her mother's tired but loving voice, her only shield against the storm. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a fleeting second, found her center, and began. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Her voice rose, soft and low at first, yet true and clear as a silver bell, a whisper straight from the deepest chambers of her heart. Each word Lyra sang wasn't just a lyric, it was a story. It was the story of long-shadowed nights without electricity in their tiny trailer, of shared loaves of day-old bread that tasted like feasts, of being held tight and safe in the pouring rain, while her mother, weary but unwavering, sang this very song with a tired, trembling voice, a lullaby of love and resilience. You make me happy when skies are gray. Gradually, inevitably, the vast auditorium fell into a profound, almost reverent silence. A well-dressed woman in the third row, who had been impatiently tapping her foot, slowly placed a hand over her heart. A young student intern, tasked with recording the event, lowered his video camera, his mouth slightly agape. Ms. Evelyn Reed, seated near the back, looked up from her program, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes shimmering with an undeniable moisture. And then, as Lyra lingered on the final, tenderly sung note of the last line, her voice imbued with an almost unbearable poignancy, "Please don't take my sunshine away." One person stood. It was Eleanor. She didn't clap, not at first. She simply stood there, her hands clasped over her heart, her gaze fixed on her daughter, her small figure a beacon of unwavering love and pride in the vastness of the auditorium. It was as if she were silently telling the entire world, "That is my daughter, that is my sunshine, and I have heard her song with my entire life." 1 second passed, then 2. Then, the Nightingale Auditorium erupted. Applause thundered like waves crashing onto a shore, a sustained, overwhelming roar of appreciation and emotion. A few people were openly wiping away tears. A seasoned journalist, known for his cynical reviews, quietly lowered his camera, removed his glasses, and thoughtfully polished them, a rare, softened expression on his face. Victoria, the sophisticated girl from Boston who had once looked down on Lyra, turned to her roommate, her own eyes glistening, and whispered so softly it was almost lost in the din. "I was wrong. So wrong." Lyra bowed, a simple, graceful inclination of her head. This time she wasn't trembling. A profound sense of peace had settled over her. She knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her soul, that she had been seen, truly seen, not for being perfect, not for being polished, but for being real. The next morning, as Lyra and Eleanor were sharing a quiet, celebratory breakfast of pancakes and syrup in a small, sun-drenched diner down the street from the conservatory, Ms. Reed arrived, an envelope clutched in her hand, a radiant smile on her face. "Congratulations, Lyra," she said, her voice warm with genuine pleasure. "The Etheria Conservatory Board held an emergency meeting late last night after the showcase. They were Well, to say they were moved would be an understatement. She placed the envelope on the table. They would like to offer you full, unconditional admission to the year-round pre-collegiate program starting this fall. No need to re-audition, all expenses covered. Eleanor set her fork down with a clatter, tears of joy streaming unashamedly down her face. Lyra looked from Ms. Reed to her mother, her heart swelling with an emotion too vast for words. She asked softly, her voice barely a whisper, Can I bring my mom with me?" Ms. Reed's smile widened. "Lyra," she said gently, "if your mother is the reason you sing like that, if she is the sunshine that fuels your incredible voice, then I believe Etheria Conservatory would be deeply honored to welcome you both." Years later, during a televised interview on a national arts program, Lyra Meadowes, now a renowned singer-songwriter, her voice having touched millions around the globe, her melodies a blend of haunting folk traditions and contemporary soul, was asked by the distinguished host, "Ms. Meadowes, looking back on your extraordinary journey, what single moment would you say truly changed the trajectory of your life the most?" Lyra didn't hesitate, her gaze clear and direct, her smile soft and reminiscent. "It was the moment my mother stood up in the middle of that vast, silent auditorium," she replied. "Before anyone else, before any scholarship or accolade, when no one else truly knew who I was or what my song meant, she did. And for me, in that moment, and in every moment since, that was, and always will be, more than enough." And so, the song of Lyra Meadowes, once a whispered melody in a dusty trailer park, continued to resonate, a testament to the enduring power of a pure voice, a mother's unwavering love, and the courage to let one's true light shine, even and especially when skies are gray. And so, Lyra's song found its way to the world. What part of her incredible journey from Sparrow Creek resonated most deeply with you? Was there a moment that reminded you of your own dreams, or a special person who always believed? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. If stories like Lyra's inspire you, and you want to witness more tales of courage, passion, and the triumph of the human spirit, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Let's keep sharing these beautiful moments together. Thanks for watching.